Hello, welcome to the living room where we're learning how to live healthy, even though we're living in a toxic world. And tonight's subject is going to be quite interesting. I'm going to go into my screen share to pull up my PowerPoint, and I'm going to do an outline of Eustace Mullins' book, Murder by Injection, the story of medical conspiracy against America by Eustace Mullins. It's a book that Eustace Mullins wrote. It was one of his last masterpieces after he had done an extensive research in the area of research with the leaders and global leaders around the world, and the big bankers and those that came on the scene and actually took control over the major industries and then dictated political policies after that to ensure that they would actually line their pockets and fill their Swiss bank accounts. He did a masterful job on this. He was one of the pioneers with pulling up the most solid research, but the last book that he actually wrote was the book on murder by lethal injection. Now, I want you to make sure that you are seeing my slides. Give me a thumbs up. Is everybody seeing my slides? Okay, good. All right. So I have shown a documentary at the living room called Medical Monopoly or Monopoly. And it's actually talking about who owns the world. And they talk about actually, it's the insurance companies. It's Vanguard, it's BlackRock. Okay, so and we're learning that, oh my goodness, they own all the big corporations. There's just a few major corporations that run subsidiary corporations. You're going to find this with a lot of pharmaceutical companies and things like that. So this is a masterful work on the medical monopoly. So let's dive in, get started. You can actually see Eustace Mullins' cover of his book. I have his book at home also, but it covers 10 chapters, starting with medical monopoly, quacks on quackery, the profits of cancer, death and the invasion word, and fluoride and AIDS and action of fertilizers, contamination of food supply, the drug trust, and Rockefeller syndicate. I might be doing a continuation. I want to keep this as short as possible. I'm only going to be covering medical monopoly and quacks on quackery for today's session. So let's dive in and get started. All right. So the discovery was that Eustace Mullins discovered that the same globalists that had the same monopoly, politically speaking and corporately speaking, also directly affected the health of every Americans and resulting in a documented decline in health of our citizens. And so now in America, we rank far down the list of health in nations, and especially in even infant mortality and other significant medical statistics. You would think that a nation that spends, what is it, $4 billion or $1 trillion every single year on medical care costs would actually be healthier than third world nations, but that's just not the case. So Mullins actually documented the shocking evidence of these cold-blooded, now these are his words, cold-blooded tycoons who not only plan to carry out famines. So he talked about how these globalists would actually get together and form think tanks, like the Bilderbergers do, and those that belong to it, and they actually map out and plan out these things globally, not just locally, but globally. And of course, if you're planning something, you go always plan it in your favor, right? So we're talking about famines, economic depressions, revolutions, and wars, but who also finds their greatest profits in their manipulations was in medical monopoly. Wow. So the cynicism and malice of these globalists is something beyond imagination. And this is one of the hardest things is for Americans to realize that. Okay, so are you not able to see the screen? All right, so hold on. Let me go out and then come back in. Well, how about now? Okay, all right, thank you. Hey, let me know because, oh my goodness. All right. Because I can't tell on my end, and if you can see it at first and then it disappears, I can't tell if it's disappearing for you. But thank you so much for letting me know. But the cynicism and malice of these globalists is something beyond the imagination. In other words, we can't comprehend such levels of syndicated evil, collaboration of evil. We can't imagine this level of evil happening in high places and high levels, deliberately milking our people of millions of dollars every year through charitable organizations. And they use these organizations as group think tanks to bolster their medical monopoly. So how do they operate? The way all mafioso operates, and that is through fear and intimidation. This is the way they all operate, and are basic techniques by the globalists maintain their control over healthcare as they ruthlessly crush any competitor who challenges their profits, and also offer behavioral control over the American people. Their most constantly used weapons are their employment of the federal agents, federal agencies carry out their intrigues, and the proof of their operation, most disturbing revelation of my work. So in other words, Eustace Mullins said that this particular research was the most disturbing of all of his research, all of his documentation that he had done his entire lifetime. So I would think we would need to pay attention because this is something that we're experiencing at a heightened level, crisis level right now. So the word physician actually means teacher. So you would think, all right, a teacher is like a scientist, meaning we're just discovering. We're discovering things. We're uncovering, discovering, connecting the dots, and exploring God's creation. And that's part of what a physician does, exploring the body, how the body functions, how the body operates, what the body needs on a daily basis, how the body falls prey to disease, what is a chronic disease versus an acute disease, all of those things. So commonly used medications, though, include back 200 years ago, this was considered commonly used medications. Senna, aloe, figs, castor oil. For parasites and worms, it was aspidium root and santonin. Western Hemisphere was pressed from the fruit of the leaves of I know how to pronounce it. Chenopodium, not Pinocchio. It's Chenopodium. Chenopodium. It's called Chenopodium. Is what it is. Herbs are usually named after those that discovered them. Analgesics or pain relievers were alcohol. Hyoscyamus leaves and opium. Hyoscyamus contains scopolamine used to induce twilight sleep. In the 16th centuries, Arabs used colchum, which was a saffron derivative for rheumatoid arthritis and gout, and cinchona bark is actually what is made from quinine. You get quinine from that. And what is everybody talking about? Hydroxychloroquine today. These are natural remedies that they use for malaria, for other herbs, for leprosy, ipecac for diarrhea, and burnt sponge was a time where they treated goiter because it had high amounts of iodine in it. And midwives use ergot to contract the uterus for giving birth. And this is all about 200 years ago that this was the standard mode of therapy. I learned that my great-grandmother was a midwife up in the mountains there in Tennessee, and that she many times had herbs at her house and would hop on her horse and go across the mountains when somebody was in labor. And so she used these herbs for that purpose. So it was actually modern medicine didn't come about really truly until the last couple of hundred years, when the era of modern medicine, when the discovery of anesthetic properties, nitrous oxide, not nitric oxide, two different animals there. Michael Faraday discovered ether and then morphine from opium. So you can see, actually, this is how people lived. This is how people functioned. This is how people operated back over 200 years ago. It was with food and it was with herbs. And so let's take a look at what has happened and who hijacked those herbs. Somebody hijacked the herb store. American Medical Association has had one principal objective: attaining and defending a total monopoly of the practice of medicine in the United States. The AMA made allopathy the basic practice. Allopathy was a type of medicine whose practice receiving training in a recognized academic school of medicine, who relied heavily on surgical procedures and the use of medications. And the leaders of this brand of medicine had been trained in those medical institutions. And guess where? Do you see what I see? In Germany. So actually it was straight out of Germany. And they were dedicated to the frequent use of bleeding and the use of drugs. They were inimical of to any form of medicine that did not agree with their allopathic pathway. Proceed from the academics in which they did not follow the orthodox procedures. In other words, if anyone went outside of the allopathic pathway, they were disciplined. In other words, they were strictly disciplined. So let's dive in and find out how that happened, where it happened. Let's take a look at history. In 1847, when the American Medical Association was founded in the United States, they were outnumbered by herbalists. They were outnumbered by homeopathics. So they had to do something to be king of the mountain. They had to reduce the amount of homeopathics, herbalists, and they had to increase in order to get a big piece of the pie, which had been organized for the purpose of stifling competition. So they organized the AMA in order to stifle the competition, driving the homeopathics out of business. By the early 1900s, the AMA began to achieve its goal. American medicine began the dark ages at that point. Promotion of a myth, the myth that it's a type of medicine that we are missing that will be the only cure for what ails you, which was effective. So in other words, they had to demoralize a homeopathic or an herbalist in order to become the standard of care or the standard mode of treatment, which actually created a new monster and created the mad doctor in a person of absolute infallibility. And I run across this all the time, and I get phone calls every day of people that say, well, they will only listen to their doctor. They will only listen to their doctor. And it breaks my heart because number one, their doctor's been trained according to what we're discussing here today. And there is absolutely no training, no teaching when it comes to holistic view of the human body, a creator view of the human body, and that food is our actual medicine, and that our body is designed by our creator to heal itself. So you get what I call the God white coat syndrome. And people will say, I won't do anything unless my doctor tells me to do it or recommends to do it. And if you go knocking on doors and go to 50 doctors in one day, they're going to tell you different things according to whatever their philosophy is at that moment. And whoever's pulling their strings are driving their Mercedes or their boats. And it was almost as if it was set up as if the medical white coat could never make a mistake. And that was just the mindset that was given when this transition was happened in the early 1900s. So let's take a look at how this happened, how this transition happened, who actually orchestrated it, who was in control of it. And so actually what happened was, and I think this has been documented profoundly, that the plagues were actually came about from a lack of cleanliness. Plumbing played a big part, and lack of plumbing, I should say, played a big part in a lot of our quote plagues. But Ivan Lich has pointed out in his shocking book, and this is one of his books, medical let's see, move this so I can see, Nemes, The Exploration of Health. And he wrote this book in 1976. And he talked about something that was happening way back in the 1960s and 70s. And it was called iatrogenic. And he claimed that the plagues we're now sweeping is defined by iatrogenics, which is illness, which is caused by your doctor's medical intervention. And he goes on to define 3 commonly encounters of iatrogenics. And number 1 is clinical iatrogenics, which is a doctor man-made illness. And of course, when you look at diagnosis and when you look at titles and names of diagnosis today, you see that you could wrap around a large plaza with the many list of different types of diagnosis. Even a psychiatrist now has so many types of fears that it can't even count them all. Fear of phobias, phobia of trees, phobia of, women, phobia of I mean, just anything. It's just crazy. But also number 2, we talked about social iatrogenesis. Which is deliberately created by mechanisms of the medical industrial complex. And that means side effects of medications given as prescribed. This is not a mistake. It is as prescribed. And then the third is cultural iatrogenesis, which saps the people's will to survive. This is why I do what I do, because I want to impart the seed of hope in every single person that has visited a clinic or a doctor and been given the diagnosis of a death sentence. And this is why I am so passionate about what I do is because I sit and talk with these people that just came from the doctor or have heard over and over again that the prognosis is slim. There's nothing they can do. They literally strip the people of their hope. And you have to go behind them and rebuild their hope after they've been given a sentence of a diagnosis. People are overcome by feelings of hopelessness. I've seen it time and time again when they exit the doctor's office and they've been told, oh, you have 6 months to live. Oh, you have this cancer. And it's not, it's progressive. It's stage 3. It's stage 4. They leave there with no hope, zapped, drained. And they're persuaded that there's absolutely nothing that can be done. And this is one of my hardest battles, is to help that person to believe again, to have hope again, to believe that God does give us solutions. God does give us answers, that our body is created in a magnificent way. And there is hope. And it's real hope by just going back and paying attention to some simple things that God laid out in nature and our vessel as our human body to pay attention to acknowledge, and to nurture. Wow. So those are the things that actually are plaguing when AMA took over our medical therapies. And in 1812, the death rate from TB, because this was one of the reasons why they said, oh, the death rate is so bad about TB, we need to actually get medications and therapies for this. Well, it was Koch's postulates, I believe from out of Germany, that in 1882 had isolated this bacteria, but the death rate had already declined to 370. So that's a big difference between 700 per 100,000 and dropping down to 370. And then by 1910, when the first TB sanitarium was open, okay, here they're scrambling and they're saying, oh my goodness, we've got to actually have sanitariums for these people. Why? Because they needed sunshine. Hello, Dr. Sunshine. They needed Dr. Rest. They needed Dr. Good Food. They needed to surround themselves with nature. They would set them out in the sanatoriums that was filled with lots of trees and flowers and gardening and blue skies and fresh air. Dr. Fresh Air. Oh my goodness. And so by this time, the rate had further declined to 180 per 100,000. So in other words, the death rate was dropping drastically before they had intervened with any of their standard therapies. So by 1950, this death rate had dropped to 50 per 100,000. Medical records prove that a 90% decline in child mortality from scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough, and measles occurred before the introduction of even antibiotics and inoculations from 1860 to 1896. This was also well before the Food and Drug Act was passed in 1905, which set up the government control of interstate commerce in drugs. By 1900s, the only one doctor for every 750 Americans. So you can see you're witnessing here a transition in history, and the historical records show that all of these plagues and the deaths from these plagues were declining drastically before even the introduction of an antibiotic or other introduction of other therapies. Medical monopoly. The Rothschilds and its Wall Street emissary, Jacob Schiff, realized that a medical monopoly might bring even greater profits than his oil trust. And of course, it was Rockefeller in 1892. Rockefeller appointed, now get this, there he is, Frederick T. Gates, head of all philanthropic endeavors. All of Rockefeller's well-publicized philanthropies was specifically designed to increase not only his wealth and power, but also the wealth and the power of hidden figures, whom he so ably represented. Frederick T. Gates. Can you guess who he was the great-grandfather of?
Great-grandfather?
He was the grandfather of.
Oh, grandfather. Okay.
He was the grandfather of Billy Goat. Yes, he was indeed. So Frederick T. Gates, together they devised a plan to dominate the entire medical education system in the United States. And this is not hearsay, it's not conspiracy theorists, this is fact. So let's dive in and take a look at some more of the facts. The Carnegie Foundation joined the Rockefeller Foundation. Abraham Flexner came on board and did what was called the Flexner Report. Primary influencer on the Flexner Report had been a graduate of Johns Hopkins University. Now, this is real important because the school had been established by Daniel Coit Gilman in 1831 to 1908. Gilman had been one of the three original incorporators of the Russell Trust at Yale University, now known as the Brotherhood of Death. Yes, there you come with some secret societies there. Its Yale headquarters had a letter in German authorizing Gilman to set up this branch of the Illuminati in the United States. Gilman incorporated and became the Rockefeller Foundation. Wow. Gilman also became an original incorporator of Rockefeller's General Educational Board, which was to take over the United States system of medical education. The Carnegie Foundation, the Russell Sage Foundation at Johns Hopkins University. It was also the headquarters of the German Allopathic School of Medicine in the USA. So I guess what is really important about this information is the fact that allopathic medicine came from Germany. Wow. So let's dive a little deeper and find out some more. History gained control. That is the agenda. The enactment of the Flexner restrictions virtually guaranteed that the medical monopoly in the United States would result in a small group of elitist students from well-to-do families, and that this small group would be subjected to intense controls. So in other words, the intense controls were you had to do it our way or you're going to hit the highway. The monopolists frequently forced various government agencies to act against anyone who posed a threat to their monopoly. Sounded like a mafioso to you? Having them arrested, prosecuted, and sent to prison. And you might think, did that really happen in America? Well, yes, it did. In 1899, the organization took a giant step forward with the arrival of Dr. George Simmons from Nebraska. Simmons was also affectionately known as Doc Simmons, although Doc Simmons did not have a doctor's degree, and he never practiced medicine. But Simmons became the editor of the Nebraska Farmer in Lincoln, Nebraska. He also operated a beauty and massage parlor on the premise as part of Lincoln Institute. His advertisements also identified him as homeopathic physician. Now here you see the same thing we see today. They're a scoundrel, but they're posing as a homeopathic physician. He was an imposter. He was only in name. So although he would soon embark on a career with the AMA, because his whole point was to destroy homeopathic treatments, which is herbals and natural things found in the earth and in nature. So he was summoned to take over the editorship of the Journal of the AMA, American Medical Association. So here you have this scoundrel who was an imposter that ran a massage parlor. We're going to learn more about that in a moment. But his real intentions wasn't that he cared about people and wanted to serve them and help them to recover their health. Interestingly enough, the AMA in 1868 had formally defined quackery. So now we got to define a word. We got to set up a word and then define it, kind of like the word conspiracy. Because the word conspiracy didn't have any bad connotation to it prior to JFK being assassinated. It only became a word after the JFK assassination in order to shut everybody up from trying to figure out who really killed JFK here. So it's a standard operation of shutting people down and pursuing truth, investigating truth. And so here you see, they say, okay, we're going to overpower the homeopathics by calling them quacks. Then we're going to pass laws that they can't practice their quackery. And then we're going to produce raids on them and imprison them and treat them unfairly and hostile. And so here you see that happening. Interestingly enough, AMA in 1868 defined quackery as the sale or administration of drugs or treatments that are not approved by legally constituted medical authorities. So you might think, well, what if that medical authority doesn't even believe in God? What if that medical authority gets their information from a source that is, let's say, out of how God created you and I, and how God created us to live and breathe and have our being on this earth in a healthy fashion? Then that is called conflict, right? Conflict arises. So let's take a look at that conflict. More about Doc Simmons. The classic ploy, you're going to get a kick out of this one because it's been the buzzword for the last 2 years, the word gaslighting. You're gaslighting me. Oh my goodness. We have been gaslighted over the past 2 years. And let's take a look at where this term, now we learned where quackery came from. We learned where conspiracy come from. Now we're going to learn where gaslighting come from. It's a classic ploy. The physician attempting to dispose of an unwanted wife by plying her with narcotics, trying to convince her that she is going insane and hopefully driving her to suicide. After some months of this treatment of Doc Simmons' wife, she fought back by filing a lawsuit against him. A highly publicized trial in 1924 ended in his wife's testimony that he had given her heavy doses of narcotics prescribed on the strengths of his medical experience, and then began proceedings to have her declared insane. You see this more than you'd like to see this. It's a targeting women. So this was not such an unusual procedure during this period of time. It had happened to literally hundreds of wives. However, his wife was very sharp and proved to be tougher than most victims. She testified in court that he tried to have her framed on a charge of insanity. This trial inspired more than a dozen books that's been written about this story, plays and movies based on this true story of a physician who tries to drive his wife insane through a campaign of administration of drugs and psychological terrorism. Sound familiar? The most famous term was birthed, gaslighting, in which Charles Boyer played the role of Doc Simmons to perfection, and the luckiest wife being played by Ingrid Bergen. Oh my goodness.
Wait, that was the name of the movie, Gaslight?
Yes, it is. It's the name of the movie. Gaslighting, yes. Yes. And so yeah, you can see how he starts to mess with the mind. So you get you off balance with drugs, and then he starts playing with the mind, manipulating the mind, second guessing, second thought. Did I? Oh, maybe it is me. Oh my goodness, am I losing it? Oh my goodness. One thing leads to another. So Doc Simmons sets up approval system for the new drugs and therapies. So he created a seal of approval for new drugs. So everybody had to funnel into Doc Simmons and his program in order to get their drugs approved, in order to disperse them through your doctor. But there was one man who ran Abbott Biologies that didn't like this system, and he bucked the system. And he told Doc Simmons, I'm not paying your mafioso prices to have my laboratory that's producing these drugs dispersed in the doctor's offices. So one day, Dr. Wallace Abbott, who founded Abbott Laboratories or Biologies in the early 1900s, he spread out a number of papers. He went to see Doc Simmons, spread out a number of papers on his desk, which happened to be, he had hired an investigator, and the investigator had actually documented him with, let's take a look at it, fake diplomas, sex charges, killing patients. And so that was just some of the top few. By the time he had viewed these documentation of his ruthless life, then he finally capitulated and says, okay, from now on, Abbott Laboratories or Biologies can actually, anything you want to be passed through. We'll accept anything you have. So what that does is the same thing as mafia. One mafia group battling against another mafia group. When they've got them by the noose, they hold on, but they wait for their opportunity to get back. They just wait for their opportunity to get back. And so guess what? He waited for his opportunity and it came. So Doc Simmons then realized that the Pharmacy of Chemistry, Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry, refused to acknowledge Abbott. So Doc Simmons thought, oh, here's my chance to get back at Dr. Abbott. And he launched a personal attack on Abbott by name calling him a quack. Oh, does this sound familiar today? Is this not a repeat and repeat today? Oh my goodness. And he called him, oh, Dr. Abbott is just wanting to commercialize medicine. Bad boy. He's out to commercialize. We're trying to keep you safe, but he's just wanting to commercialize medicine. And he wrote articles. Remember, he was a journalist. There you go with the media wars. He wrote all of these vicious lies about him in his articles. The AMA has openly threatened firms that advertise in media other than their own journals with withdrawal of acceptance of their products. So in other words, if you try to promote even an authentic, ethical product from nature, you're not allowed to. You can only go through their channels. Every branch of the federal government active in the field of medicine began to be completely dominated by the association. Wow. Now comes the next person on the scene with Simmons is Fishbein. Now, Fishbein, some of you may have heard his name because he kind of operated the same way that Doc Simmons operated, with some fake identity and some fake degrees and a lot of charisma and a lot of magical manipulation. So Fishbein and Simmons double quacks, doubled up. Dr. Morris Fishbein, a journalist also, by the way, he was also a journalist, found a home at the AMA. He did not leave until 1949. Oh my goodness, that was over 25 years. He ruled and reigned. When he was literally kicked out, he had to be literally kicked out of the AMA, who admitted under oath in 1938 that he had never practiced medicine a day in his life. And yet he was the man that called the shots, laid out the laws, put the policies together for every doctor to abide by, and every pharmaceutical company to abide by, and every doctor to abide by, everyone to abide by. Fishbein was actually called the Hitler of the medical professionals. Wow, I wouldn't want to go down with that title. So who leads the pack of wolves at this point? Fishbein became the medical advisor to Look magazine. There we go. They know that the battle's won through media. So they hit to the streets with magazines. So he's a head medical advisor to Look magazine, the second largest publication in the United States. In 1935, he had ventured into what was probably his greatest financial coup, the annual publication of a massive volume. So when every doctor wants to go for medical advice, or the general housewife that wants to put her hands on some medical advice, she would have to go to the Modern Home of Medical Advisor book that was promoted by Look magazine, right? Written by a scoundrel, a fake scoundrel. The Council on Pharmacy and Chemistry had been set up in 1905 at the same time that the Food and Drug Act had been passed by Congress. So in other words, they're getting their ducks in a row so no one can slip through the cracks. Everyone will have to go through their channels, and they will get a piece of the pie as you start from point A all the way to the end result, and they will not approve your drug unless you abide by their program. The two groups always work together very closely. So here you see the smoke and mirrors. Under Fishbein's editorship, the AMA Health magazine, Hygiea, carried the banner headline, Pure Foods, honestly advertised. I just love how they use those buzzwords that attract the housewife or the busy businessman and think, oh yeah, I want pure foods for my family. Wouldn't any mother want a pure food for her family? How about honestly advertise? Oh my goodness, I want something honest. Don't you want something honest? So they use these buzzwords to attract your attention, but it's smoke and mirrors. There's nothing honest behind it. There's nothing pure behind it. So the seal of acceptance of the Committee on Foods of the AMA is your best guarantee that the claims of quality for any product are correct and that the advertising is truthful. That's how they build themselves. They branded themselves as saying, you want our seal of accountability. Now, if let's say you made canned tuna, you would have to go to them, pay them to get that seal, right? So here are some of those that use the seal: White Star Tuna and Chicken of the Sea brand. they accepted this AMA seal of approval. But the Food and Drug Administration was repeatedly seizing shipments of these very brands of tuna, condemning them because they consisted in whole or in part of decomposed animal substances. Ow! Whoa, I have a friend who worked for the US and he has told me privately many hair-raising stories. Seal of approval exposed. So the AMA Committee on Foods always verged on the brink of exposure or serious damage lawsuits. So they subjected themselves to lawsuits. So let's say, for instance, you're the housewife and you open that can of tuna and you decide to do your own investigation instead of mixing it in your little tuna casserole and feeding it to your family. And you go, oh, this is disgusting. I'm going to take it down and I'm going to have it analyzed. Oh, my goodness. And then files a lawsuit. My goodness. Then it would be exposed, right? Because it had virtually no testing apparatus. Here's your key, folks. This is why I love Neolife, is because it's the full-fledged highest level of quality standard testing. And yet these seals had virtually no testing apparatus. It was a name only, smoking mirrors only. So in 1939, Fishbein awarded the seal of acceptance to some 2,700 different individual food products, which were produced by 1,653 companies. Its chief rival in this field. Now, there's always going to be competition, and the competition was the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval. Who doesn't remember the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval? I remember it. Oh, you know, if you wanted appliance, you always went in there, and guess who they said was the best? It was always Sears. I wonder why. They had the best washer and dryer and stove and dishwasher and microwave. They always won. I wonder why. So all of a sudden, the Good Housekeeping Seal was coming under discretion because they realized, well, what kind of standards do you really have to say that, you know, this stove or this refrigerator or appliance really has a Good Housekeeping Seal? They realized there was none. So by May of 1941, the Federal Trade Commission issued cease and desist orders against the Good Housekeeping Seal, folks. Oh my goodness. And I remember these things as getting magazines in the mail and seeing, oh yeah, that has the Good Housekeeping Seal. Fishbein saw the handwriting on the wall and thought, oh, there went down, so I'm next. Sound familiar? Oh my goodness. He discontinued the AMA Seal of Acceptance awards for the general purpose of foods. So he goes, I better back out before I am found out. Blocking access to real health. In the meantime, when I do my class on vitamin E, I bring this out extensively. But in 1939, Dr. Josephson submitted the important record of his groundbreaking research to Science magazine on vitamin E therapy for myasthenia gravis, which is muscle weakness, grave, extensive muscle weakness. Sound familiar today about what's happening in hearts today? Heart weakness, muscle, heart is a muscle, which they refused to print. Why did they refuse to print it? Because Dr. Josephson later pointed out that the AMA had deliberately concealed the benefits of vitamin E therapy for more than 25 years. When I do my class on vitamin E, I go through the history of this and I expose it very thoroughly. But it breaks my heart when God created something from nature that can bring such a healing composition to the body, and yet it's blocked because it doesn't fit their agenda, doesn't put money in their pockets. And so this was only one instance of hundreds which the AMA withheld life-saving information from the public. The benefits of vitamin E therapy are now widely recognized and known, but why did it take 25 years to even get outside of the box? So heart disease, why vitamin E was ignored as heart disease for over 40 years. Wow. So dangerous drugs are approved when natural remedies are blocked and say unsafe, unproven, unsafe, unproven, unsafe, unproven. Oh my goodness, but you give enough money, you can get anything that's a drug as long as you spread the money and give everybody a piece of the pie. By Fishbein, during his tenure as public spokesman for AMA, and is lengthy and testifying, Fishbein hastened to approve the notorious diet drug. Now, I'm going to be doing a class really soon on weight loss, and I am going to nail one of the new diet drugs. This is not new in terms of the industry. They have been pushing diet pills since the beginning of the AMA. And these diet pills wreak havoc on your metabolism, your hormones, your liver, your body, all over. They're highly addictive even. They put your body in a position where you're in a sense, you're addicted to having this drug. So the diet drugs that came on the market, and then after so many years of damage and thousands of people harmed, then they pull them off if there's been enough cry in the marketplace. Despite laboratory records that it was dangerous to our health. Another drug was triparacetamide, manufactured by Merck under licensing from the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, was a dangerous arsenical drug used to counter the effects of syphilis. I think I don't need to even go further in that. I think you know the history on that one and what it caused and the damage that it caused and the people's lives that were damaged and the people who died from this. Paul Ehrlich, who actually founded or formulated this, he found out that it caused blindness to the optic nerve. And he gave them warnings, stop this drug, but they still would not stop. If you spin the wheel of spitting out money to all these corporations, do you think one little tiny squeaky voice is going to stop that wheel from spitting out all this money to everybody? It's going to take a bigger clog in the wheel, like lots of lawsuits and lots of media coverage and outcry from the public. Does it sound familiar of what's happening today? Drugs approved over and over again from the very inception. And I'm not going to go over everything because there's too much on this page, but just looking at all of the drugs that the Rockefeller Foundation has put out, and how long it was on the market and how many people died. And then all of a sudden it was withdrawn from Merck to Johnson & Johnson, kidney disease, and yet there were, again, safe medications like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin that were told, oh, no, you can't, this doesn't pass our standards. So shortly after the AMA Council was forced to accept it. So in other words, you're seeing this pattern over and over again. Simmons and Fishbein, a gigantic nationwide drug operation was perfected, which today poses a serious threat to the health of every American citizen. This drug cartel has not been taken down, but I am so glad to announce that more people are awake, more people are asking questions, more people are investigating, more people are curious and not as scaled over with the eyes or not as set in their mindset. At least they're asking questions. There's more people today asking questions than ever before, and I'm very grateful for that. They also went on to fix the drug prices. All of that is fixed to drive medical care cost up, because how are they going to get more of the pie? They have to extend the pie. So they had to create a bigger pie. So in 1976, the national bill was $95 billion, which was 8.4% of gross national product. Moving on down, you can see it's increase. And today, it's a whopping 40% of our gross national product today. Oh my goodness. There's something wrong with this picture. And dose out the drugs was the plan. And in 1976, doctors wrote 1 billion doses for sleeping pills, some 27 million prescriptions, which resulted in 25,000 trips to the emergency rooms for adverse drug reactions, and some 1,500 emergency room deaths for tranquilizers. 90% of these victims were women. I saw a pattern here that women are the victims. Women were the victims. Women were the victims. And I can go on to say several other things. I'm not going to say it right now, maybe in another class, but I can see how women were targeted and became the victims. By 1978, 5 billion tranquilizer pills were being prescribed. The most notorious of these was Valium. Produces $500 million per year income by the Hoffman LaRoche Company. It is the epitome of the mythical soma described by Aldous Huxley's in Brave New World. The perfect drug, narcotic, Stepford wives, pleasantly hallucinate. Oh my goodness. This is one of the reasons why they're getting away with it, is because they have lulled us to sleep through medications. So we're not awake and alarmed and rising up. Drug damage, an English study showed that even aspirin given can cause fetal defects, birth defects, bleeding in newborn babies, and yet it's recommended for adults for heart issues. In September of 1980, the Food and Drug Administration announced that it would remove from the market more than 3,000 drugs whose effectiveness had not been proven. Wait a minute. But they approved them. Oh, wait a minute. They made a bunch of money. Oh, wait a minute. They damaged a lot of people in the process. Now they're going to withdraw 3,000. This is back in 1980, folks. This is decades ago, and it hasn't changed. If anything, it has accelerated like on steroids today. Americans have spent more than $1 billion on these same unproven drugs, many of which have been accepted by the AMA. Created a diversion, war on quackery, yes, after Congress had passed stringent requirements in 1962 to force the drug manufacturers to prove that their drugs are ineffective, a requirement which in many cases is impossible. It's called the LD 50-50, lethal dose 50-50. The war against quackery began. So this is the standard operation where if you have anyone that's opposing you or threatening your money-making machine, then you're going to label them. You're going to write all kinds of caustic journalism against them. And then you're going to go after laws in order to terrorize them. This is actually what is happening today. It's the same mode of operation. You'll find this mode of operation in communism, actually. It's where they get it from, and Nazism. After Congress has passed stringent, so in other words, war on quackery, A few months after the new regulations went into effect, the AMA Board of Trustees met to create a new committee, and that was a committee to attack quackery, which was formally incorporated in November 2nd, 1963. It was originally intended to destroy the entire profession of chiropractors in the USA. They went after chiropractors. Why? Because they were out of the box. They actually saw the body as a whole person, as a whole being. And they actually were very effective. So it was taking a part of their pie they didn't want to be taken because they're greedy. And so they went after chiropractors. They labeled them quacks. And guess what they did? They created an army to terrorize them. Criminal syndicates, what? Syndicalists say that were able to enlist the full police powers of the federal government through contacts in the Federal Trade Commission, the post office. You do know that our post office is privately owned, don't you? The Food and Drug Administration, United States Public Health Services. These federal agents were solicited by the charitable foundations to initiate police actions against hundreds of unsuspecting health practitioners throughout the United States. I remember this happening. I was very young at this time, but I do remember it happening. It was one of the most massive, well-planned, and ruthless operations in which the federal agents ever engaged. In many cases, people were arrested for selling, sometimes giving away booklets, which advised them about vitamins, and found themselves given restraining orders from the post office, meaning you can't mail vitamins. Rockefeller even passed a law saying you could not mail a vitamin E at the time because he was busy creating his own synthetic vitamin E. Department of Justice and the Food and Drug Administration, others who were distributing various salves, Nordstrom's, and other preparations, most of them based in herbal formulae, received heavy fines and imprisoned sentences. In every case, all the stocks of their practitioners, many of whom were elderly, impoverished, were seized and destroyed as dangerous substances. Look this up, folks. This is our real history. It really happened here in the United States. They targeted these people, called them quacks, and shut them down in a terrorist fashion. Does this sound familiar? Wow. The twist. The death toll from approved drugs, not home. The death toll was from approved drugs, not home remedies. Vitamin E's never killed anybody. It's a very safe nutritional substance that comes from food. The AMA then sponsored a national health fraud conference. Now here we go with all the conferences. They even held them in whose principal spokesman of Congressman Claude Pepper. So here you have this political drive. He planned to support socialized medicine in the United States with his left-wing socialist agenda. He endorsed their police state methods against anyone who dared to challenge the power of the medical monopoly. Pepper claimed that health fraud was here we go with exaggerated numbers again. See, this is what Jesus called hypocrites. This is a prime example of hypocrisy. Calling a $10 billion a year scandal, he demanded that the Justice Department use the RICO Act of racketeering-inspired criminal organization strike force against medical charlatans and health frauds. I don't really advise you to watch this movie, but it is true. It's called The Dallas Buying Club. That actually is a true story of what I'm talking about here in history in the United States of America. how this gentleman who had AIDS went over the border in Mexico and started getting these herbs and carrying them back into the United States. And they didn't like it because he was actually helping people to get healthier and living longer. And they used RICO on him and arrested him to shut him down. And it's called the Dallas Buying Club attack. In many cases, the victims lost their homes, their life savings, and all other, because in the RICO Act, by the way, they're allowed to confiscate everything you own. Your bank account, they're allowed to confiscate cars, houses, land, properties, jewelry, everything under the RICO Act. That's why they wanted to use it against these little old ladies that had a stash of herbals in their kitchen cabinet, right? Now,
Claude Pepper, part of this whole thing?
yeah, he was the political driver.
Claude Pepper was a
I
Florida
think he
guy.
was.
Yeah.
He was. In fact, they just mentioned that he was actually a politician in the state of Florida. When I was reading this, I saw that he had Florida connections.
Yeah.
I go, yuck. So all because they wanted to drive the medical monopoly. It was the most blatant use of police powers by their big rich to protect their profitable enterprises. To this day, most of these victims have no idea that they were knocked off by the Rockefeller monopoly. I personally know some of the people that I resource online this happened to. There's a gentleman here in Florida that he is a pastor and his son is in prison down in Miami because they were distributing a natural substance to help people, and they're still in prison today, right now. You should hear their story. We are in a war. By 1986, this medical monopoly had reached a yearly take of $355.4 billion. It's up into the trillions now a year, 11%. Now it's 40% of the gross national product. Time magazine gave a brief summary of one of such episodes in 1970 with the headlines entitled Schizophrenic AMA. 30 to 40 dissonants, young idealistic doctors had rushed the podium and taken over the AMA annual meeting for a few moments. Their leader denounced the AMA from the lectern in vigorous terms. The AMA does not stand for the American Medical Association. It stands for the American Murder Association. These were young, about 40 young doctors who stormed the stage, pushed aside the speaker and said, "You do not represent us. You don't represent the American people. Instead, your title should be American Murder Association." Armed guards had to go on stage and pull these 40 up-and-coming doctors, young students, away from the stage. And the gentleman that actually led that, well, today it would be called an insurrection terrorist act, but today, back then, he just said, you're not giving us due representation. You don't represent who we are. And that young man, and doing some research, turned out he actually became a surgeon in a hospital. So another one that actually went against the grain was Dr. Mendelsohn, Robert Mendelsohn. He was one of the first books that woke me up when I was about 19 years old. Someone gave me his book and I cried reading through those pages. My spirit was a blaze of a fire of passion, saying, "Oh my goodness, somebody needs to do something." And Lord, I said, Lord, use me in the little bit minuscule way that you could use me to help wake up people. But the title of his book was Confessions of a Medical Heretic. And he had actually documented that 100,000 women had hysterectomies, and that only 1,700 of them died as a result of the surgery. Well, no one should die as a result of the surgery. He believes that half of these women could have been saved as their surgery was needless. In other words, it was a surgery of the month, kind of like tonsil surgery of the month, appendectomy surgery of the month. How about gallbladder surgery of the month? I call it C-section vaginal bypass surgery of the month. He quotes the Boston Collaborative Drug Surveillance Program, which found that the risk of being killed by drug therapy in America hospital was 1 in 1,000, and that 30,000 Americans died each year from adverse reactions to drug prescribed. This is not by mistake, it's by prescription for them by their doctors. Mendelssohn minces no words in his opinion of modern medicine. He calls it the church of death. He calls it a religion. He calls it a way of worship, whose 4 holy waters are, I'll not say that word out loud, but you see it, fluoride and any kind of IV fluids in the body, that's not the correct mixtures. Silver nitrate. Mendelssohn dismisses all 4 as being of questionable safety. So in other words, these are the standard modes of, let's say, helping you exit quickly rather than recover quickly. IG Farben, can't do this talk without mentioning IG Farben and the Holocaust. The most powerful German economic corporate emporium in the first half of this century was known as IG Farben. A powerful cartel, Bayer, Heist, and other German chemical and pharmaceutical companies. Mind you, in the very beginning, allopathic medicine came from Germany. IG Farben was the single largest donor to the election, campaign of Adolf Hitler. Sound familiar? And the beginning of the modern day pharmaceutical industry. Zyklon B, an extermination gas produced by Heist, was used to kill millions of innocent people. Before their corpses were burned, the U.S. government investigated of all the factors leading to the Second World War of 1946 came to the conclusion that IG Farben, the Second World War, would not have happened or been possible without their assistance. Folks, if this doesn't stir you up, if this doesn't anger you, then I would check the temperature of your passion gauge, your consciousness. Are you awake? Economic greed by companies like Bayer, Heist was the key factor in bringing about these atrocities to human beings on the planet. Wow. We've got to understand history, folks, so we don't repeat it. We can't ignore it. We have to understand it, make the connections, and go, wait a minute, is this the same thing that's happening as a repeat today? That the truth will set you free. It is noteworthy that the insignia of the medical profession is 2 snakes entwined on a staff. However, the University of Rochester, deciding that this was a little bit excessive to have 2 serpents, recently reduced it to 1. The caduceus is the mythological symbol of the Roman god Mercury. He was the patron of the messengers. But he also had a somewhat unsavory reputation as the association of outlaws. Merchants and thieves. Sound familiar? Outlaws, merchants, and thieves. They think that they do not have to abide by any code of ethics whatsoever. They create their own. In the ancient world, merchants were synonymous with the other two categories, as you can see. And then pharmacy, what does it mean? The true meaning words: pharmacy, pharmacist, pharmaceutical. Pharmakeia means sorcery. In the New Testament, pharmakeia carried with it the idea of sorcery, occultism, black magic. Paul used it in Galatians 5:20 in referencing witchcraft, idolatry, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies. Is also found administering drugs to poison them. Sorcery, magical arts, often found in connection with idolatry, deception, idolatry, poisoning, the works of the flesh. The use of drugs, whether simpler or potent, was generally accompanied by incantations and appeals to occult powers with the provision of various charms. So folks, in other words, it's just not a good definition, and we need to pay attention to the definition of pharmakeia, because I thought this was very interesting that just before the Grammy Awards, CBS tweeted out and said, "You can say that again, we are ready to worship." They know what they're worshiping. They're not confused. You might be confused, but they're not confused. They know exactly that these are acts of worship, and they're not worshiping the God of the Bible. And guess what? The Grammys was sponsored by, brought to you by Pfizer. Yes, the folks, again, this was an actual tweet by CBS claiming that get ready for the Grammys, we're about to worship. So inspect the fruit. Despite the AMA frantic claims of improving medical care, records show that the state of Americans' health is declining, folks. The more money we throw to it, the sicker, more depressed, more obese, more suicidal, and more sterile Americans become. This is also the reason why doctors will only treat symptoms of disease and not address any root causes. Most of the time, it's a lack of nutrition by not following God's way to honor your vessel. Doctors do not learn about nutrition. And so and they can actually say it was a success, even though the patient dies in the process. Sorceries, I'm going to read out of Revelations. It says, "And the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more in all thee, and no craftsman whatsoever craft in thee shall be found any more in thee, and sound of milestone heard in thee, and the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived." Wow. Here you have that symbol all over everything that's driving what we're seeing today, from the World Health Organization, Center for Disease Control. It is all controlled. You just got the fast track history connecting the dots. The same people that started it are the same people that passed the baton to the next generation. And they are accelerating this agenda at an alarming crisis level and crisis point. So I am going to actually stop the recording. Thank you so much for listening to this information. There's more information where this came from, Healthy Living Inspirations, and this was Research Hour on AMA.